Second reader for this evening is going to be Eddie. Piri is a consummate slasher. By that I mean that he is good at many, many things. He is a writer, slash actor, slash musician, slash comedian, slash creative director. Most recently, he was also the writer in residence at the South Australian Writers' Centre, and that is where I met him. Please come up to the stage, Eddie.
Reading a piece for you that I wrote. Just read it and you'll work it out from there. Use your imagination. This one's called The Watcher. Anyway. When the rain sweeps in over the plain of flat grass and the wind picks up so that it whistles in your ear like a screeching spectre, the Watcher sits on the floor of the tower with his rifle leaning up against the railings. He runs a dry tongue across a cigarette paper and carefully sticks the two ends together and rolls his cigarette. The Watcher places the thin stick between cracked lips and fumbles in his jacket pocket for his lighter. 1, 2, 3 clicks later and his face is momentarily lit in the fading light. He spends a ponderous moment staring at the flickering flame and it stares right back at him. Then he brings it up to his face, cups a gloved hand around his cigarette and the flame around his cigarette and the flame and lights the tip. One long drag and the eye blazes red and he pushes out a puff of smoke. The smoke crawls like tendrils from his open mouth and weaves up into his nose. The Watcher puts the lighter back into his pocket and stretches out his legs until they touch the other side of the tower. The tower is a small enclosed box, windowless, with a slanting tin roof and standing on thick wooden stilts. The Watcher smokes his cigarette and listens to the drum of the rain on the tin roof. Night falls without notice. The clouds are so thick they make the world stand in half darkness anyway. The rain keeps falling, but it eases up a bit, and the Watcher stands leaning up against the railing, rolling a fresh cigarette around his mouth. The rifle sits next to him, cold as the night. The Watcher zips up his jacket all the way to the neck and shuffles on his feet to keep warm. He finishes his cigarette and chucks it over the side of the railing. Morning finds the plains covered in a blanket of fog. Clouds so low they stick to the Watcher's jacket in little rolling drops. He wipes the sticky wet from his forehead and peers through the shroud. The Watcher hears the faint thudding of feet before he can even see anything. He picks up his rifle and slides back the chamber, rests the butt on his shoulder and holds the forestock in his right hand. He positions his right eye behind the sight and closes his left. The index finger of his left hand curls around the trigger. It barely quivers. The Watcher stands so still he might be mistaken for a statue up there in the tower. The fog is thick in the distance, but he can hear the stamping of feet coming closer. In the early morning mist, a bird issues a shrill call from somewhere. Below on the plain, a single figure emerges from the mist. A woman, wrapped in loose-fitting clothing, face and arms exposed, feet sinking into the mud. The Watcher adjusts the rifle by tilting it slightly, corrects his aim. The woman looks up at the tower, at the face hidden behind the side of the rifle. For a second they must be looking into each other's eyes. Then there is the crack of a whip and the woman drops to the ground as if her soul has been sucked out in an instant. He knows that look. The look the woman had before the Watcher sucked the soul right out of her. He has seen it so many times before he can close his eyes and he can still see that look, like it is playing on repeat beneath his eyelids. The wide eyes, thin line of the mouth pulling downwards at the corners. Fear, total annihilating fear. He could recognise that look on anyone anywhere because he sees that look almost every day. There is a memory. The Watcher recalls it most nights as he sits sucking smoke down his lungs. Mid-morning light falling across his bed in slattered rows, watching the dust that is caught in the columns of sunshine flitter lazily without purpose. The sweet smell of her hair in his face. It itches his nose, and he pushes it away. Her skin soft on his. He rubs his thumb over a mole in her arms as if he could erase it. "What are you thinking?" she says. "Nothing." "Nothing? Why should I need to think of anything to say?" he says. "So think of me." "Okay." The Watcher sees that look 5 more times before the sun sets. There is no rain today. Usually they don't come when it is clear. Usually they wait until the sky cracks open and it rains until the plains disappear under a shimmering lake. Or after, When the clouds hang so low, the watcher can barely hold his hand before his face and still see it. But things are getting worse, so they have to come. What else is there to do? It is still 3 weeks before the watcher is relieved of his post. 3 more weeks in the tower, watching the plains like a bird might watch its prey, from far above, with piercing eyes that reach further than would seem possible. There are 2 hatches in the floor of the tower. One opens up to the ladder that leads down to the plains, the other to a small compartment filled with dried and canned foods. When the watcher is hungry, he opens the hatch and pulls out a can of apricots. He splits the lid and sends cold, gooey juice down his chin. When the watcher sleeps, it is only in fitful bursts. If he sleeps too long, he might miss something on the plane, except so far he's never let any of them through. If they get through, then they might infect others, people who are relying on him. The watcher can't sleep because the people in the town need him to always be awake, so he only ever sleeps for minutes at a time. The watcher remembers the music. On cold nights when the wind barely blows and the rain is soft on the tin roof, he can conjure tiny snippets of music in his head. Grand symphonies of delicate refrains, music that soars like so many angels beating their wings. The rain plays a scattered rhythm over the top, a syncopated accompaniment that he has to consider. Every so often, as he plays the melody in his head, the rain synchronizes perfectly, if only for a beat, and then it skitters off again in a different direction. Then the rain and the wind picks up again and he can't hear the music anymore. Most things are forgotten. He had to forget because survival counted on only remembering what was worthwhile. History always has a way of forgetting itself. If the things that had been were lost, then what was seemed easier somehow. The watcher clings to some memories because forgetting them would be too painful, would mean he would die, because without them he wasn't really living at all. The people in the town had forgotten almost everything, even how it all began. The watcher didn't know what those he shot down on the plains remembered. Probably nothing. He never had a chance to ask. His memory. She is sitting in the kitchen and the radio is on. He only catches garbled snippets with his head in the fridge getting the milk. When he looks up, she is sitting there with wide eyes and a mouth a thin line that falls down at the corners. She is afraid. What is it? The end, she says. In the little box under the hatch with all the canned foods is a photo of her, faded second, tattered at the edges. She smiles at him with pearly teeth and he cries every time he pulls it out. He sits with his back on the walls of the tower, his rifle resting at his feet, and he weeps with shuddering breaths until it hurts. Then he puts it back in and closes the hatch. If he forgets, then he might as well be dead. The crows don't get diseased. They hack and gnaw at the bodies on the plains and strip them bare until they're left to bake in the heat of the sun. He watches them from the tower, with a cigarette rolling around his mouth. The murder squawks and circles and picks the flesh clean. Once or twice he feeds the crows the last bit of food from a can. They hop cautiously along the railing and tip their heads inquisitively. The watcher finds himself smiling when the crows take the food from his outstretched hand and flap away. They don't seem sick at all. It mustn't affect animals. The rain falls in great big sheets and the wind picks it up so it stings the watcher in the face. His cigarette gets too damp and sodden and he spits it out. Underneath the howling wind he hears the running feet and grabs the cold muzzle of the rifle and lifts it to his shoulder. The plains stretch out beneath the tower and end in a huddled line of trees some 300 metres away. The watcher closes his left eye and peers through the sight. There are 2 men who have passed the line of trees and are running haggard across the grass. He doesn't wait to see their faces. He doesn't want to see that look again. Not this time. The watcher readjusts his line, swallows, and his rifle cracks twice in quick succession. The men crumple. It is like the weight of the rain has suddenly pushed them down. They don't get back up. The last time he saw her, she is in bed with her hands tied to the sides to stop her pulling at her own skin. When he walks in, she looks up at him and smiles without parting her lips. Her eyes shine in the light of the bedside lamp, and he has to grab the door frame because otherwise he'll slump to his knees. His legs are that weak. Let's make this quick. Okay, he says. He sways for a second on elastic legs and then stumbles to her side. Her breathing is short and shallow. Her skin glistens with sweat, and the welts all over her body are red even in the semi-darkness. She looks him right in the face behind wet eyes, and this time smiles enough to show her pearly whites. Look at me, she says. I can't. He stands next to her with his head bowed and sobs uncontrollably, his whole body shaking with every shuddering breath. She starts to cough terribly, and then he looks up and they both look at each other. I can't do this anymore. I need you to do it. But maybe it will get better. You could get better. You know that isn't true. You're right. He combs her hair back with quivering fingers. He leans forward and kisses her forehead and tastes her salty skin on his cracked lips. I should have gotten sick, not you. Why can't I get sick instead? Because I wouldn't have the strength to do it. Only you do, she says. They stay there for a while, him sitting half on the bed, laying slumped across her, with his face resting on her forehead, listening to each other breathing. Eventually, she says, put on some music, will you? He gets up and crosses the room to the record player. He picks up the cardboard sheet and slides out a dusty vinyl. Then he places it on the record player, sliding the record into place. He picks up the arm of the player and carefully places the stylus on the delicate grooves of the record. He switches it on and the sound drifts quietly out through the crackling speakers. He returns to her bed where she is listening to the soft music with a lazy smile on her face. That's nice. Untie me. Put your arms. It's okay. I won't have to hold off for long. His hands are shaking, but he manages to unfasten her arms from the bed and she lifts her hand gingerly like she's using them for the first time. She holds out her hands to him, palm up, and he takes them in his. They are warm. He can feel the rough contours of her skin. He stands tracing the lifelines on her hands until he reaches the end. Some things we just have to accept, she says. I don't want to have to accept it. You have to. Okay. I love you, she says. He lets her hand drop and she lets him slide out one of the pillows she is resting her head on. Her eyes are wide and her mouth a thin line that pulls down at the corners when he places the pillow gently over her face. The Watcher has killed more people on the plains than he cares to count. Once he could remember their faces, cold and stark, but then they just became a loose amalgamation, a mesh of features altogether lost to knowing one another. He has to forget them if he is to survive. It is the middle of the day and the sun hangs in the middle point of his curvature like a gleaming face looking down at the earth. He has to keep watching because now they come at all times of the day, no matter what the weather. His rifle stands propped up beside him, just out of reach, but he can get it in an instant because it is almost an extension of himself. He is smoking a cigarette in the hot heat and the red tip of it is like a miniature burning sun. He grabs the cigarette and flicks it and the ash at the end of the cigarette crumbles and gets caught up in the breeze. Then he stubs the cigarette out on the railing of the tower and extinguishes the miniature sun. When he looks up, there are 5 people running across the field towards the tower. The Watcher has his rifle now in his hands. He rests it on his shoulder and fingers the trigger. The Watcher glances through the sight and the rifle issues 4 more cracks. The bodies drop. He shifts his rifle again and clocks a woman staggering wildly through the grass. The trigger offers a second of resistance, and in that moment he spots something on the woman's back, something that makes him rear his rifle up as he pulls the trigger. The rifle cracks and the woman collapses to the ground. He opens the hatch and climbs down the ladder as his feet hit the soft earth. He has the rifle slung across his back and he takes long, quick strides. His back prickles under his shirt and the heat of the sun above him and his forehead begins to sweat into his eyes. He wipes the sweat away and then he reaches the woman. She is lying on her back staring up at the sky. There is a sticky pool of red beneath her that is running along the cracks of the dirt like rivers filling the etchings of the earth. He sees that she is still alive, and when he approaches, she tries to sit up, but he puts his foot on her chest and pushes her back. The Watcher looks about the plain, but can't see anything, and the woman lets out a croak and turns to face him again. Her eyes are shining. She is casting shadow as he stands before her, looking down. Her eyes are wide, her mouth a thin line coming down the corners. That look, except at close quarters, it looks less like fear. It isn't fear. She doesn't have anything left to fear. It is acceptance. Everything is forgotten. This woman, the Watcher, civilization itself. One day it will all be forgotten. She accepts that. Her eyes turn cold and even the light of the sun won't warm her. He takes his foot off her chest and hitches up his rifle. There is a sound of movement and he looks up. There is a child standing not far off. The Watcher moves towards the kid. He saw the kid on the woman's back and that's why he bucked his shot at the last moment, and now the kid is here and quivering like a frightened rabbit. He swings his rifle around and stands before the child, a small boy. The boy looks up and he stares into the boy's eyes and the boy stares back at him. The Watcher lifts the rifle and points the mouth at the kid, ready to suck out his soul. They stand there under the noon sun, both listening to each other breathing. Then he feels the rifle slacken in his hand and it drops to the ground. He passes the kid without looking at him again and walks towards the huddled line of trees in the distance. Thank you.